Welcome, everyone. I'm Paula Sellers, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our safety first, which is going to be our exits. We have exits on either side of the room, and the closest entry point or exit point is going to be out here to the parking lots. If we hear any fire drills or anything like that or alarms, those will be our course of action, is to follow the exits, okay? If you have any cell phones, please silence them at this time if you haven't done so already. I'm going to state the purpose of the meeting, which is to provide an overview of and accept comments on the ETTP Main Plant Area groundwater proposed plan. The format will be that Roger Petrie will provide an overview of the ETTP Main Plant Area groundwater proposed plan, followed by a public comment segment. Public input on the preferred alternative presented in the proposed plan will be video recorded. Those wishing to provide input or make a comment during the public comment segment are asked to indicate that on a sign-up sheet when entering the auditorium. And they're right outside here, or they'll be handed to you if you want comment cards. You'll be called on in the order in which you signed up. You'll have 3 minutes to speak. If you're not finished with your segment, you can complete it after everyone has the opportunity to speak. Please speak into the microphone. And we're going to have a freestanding microphone here in the center aisle. And ensure that your comment is captured in the video recording. Please state and spell your name for the record. If you don't want to participate or provide comments verbally, please feel free to provide them on the comment cards available in the back of the room or email them, and you can mail them as well. I'm going to introduce Roger Petrie. He's with DOE, and I'm also going to state who's from DOE in the audience. We have Aaron Sutton, and from U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, Region 4, we have Carl Frody. From the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation, Randy Young, and Heather Lutz. Hi. All right, we're going to start with our presentation.
Thank you, Paula. I appreciate everybody coming out this evening. This is sort of a big deal for us. This is our first major groundwater decision among all three parties here on the reservation. So this demonstrates a lot of work by all parties involved, and there are a lot of folks who put a lot of time into making this happen. So real quick, I want to tell you what I'm going to tell you, and then after I'm done, I'll tell you what I told you. So what I'm going to tell you is I'm going to give you an overview of a background of where we are right now and what the purpose of the meeting is. Give you an overview of our cleanup strategy, how we got to where we are right now and the timeline it took to get here. Give you a overview of the scope of the proposed plan at a very high level, and then give you an overview of the actual different, an evaluation of the different remedies that we looked at. Then we'll go a little more deeper into the actual remedy that DOE has put into the proposed plan. It's what we call our preferred alternative. And then how that will be executed at the main plant area. And then finally, we'll give you, at the end, we'll give you an overview of the public input process, how you can make public comments and how those will be responded to. So quickly, a background of what we're here for is, like Paula said, we've prepared a proposed plan, which is one step in the CERCLA process, for a remedy for the groundwater that is located at the main plant area at ETTP. The proposed plan it's what we call DOE's selected preferred alternative. That proposed plan is reviewed both by TDEC and EPA, and that they approve that. Once they have approved that, we get to this point in the process, which is a public comment period, which started back in last month, and at the beginning of this month, and we'll go into the first part of May. It also involves tonight's public comment meeting, both of which are required by the regulations. So our strategy, this is how we got to where we are. Back in 1991, the three parties entered into what was called the Federal Facility Agreement. It is a part of CERCLA, and what it did is it gave the state of Tennessee, the Department of Energy, and EPA equal seat at the table about how to decide how to clean up the Oak Ridge Reservation. In the early to mid-90s, it was agreed that the first thing we would address would be high-risk, high-priority releases and off-site releases. And in that view, what we did was the first things we addressed was Lower Watts Bar Reservoir. We came to a record of decision for that. And then we came to a record of decision for Lower East Fork Poplar Creek floodplain. Once we had those actions done, we entered into what we call our watershed rods. These are rods that cover large geographical areas of the reservation. Things such as Bethel Valley, Bear Creek Valley, Melton Valley, Upper East Fork Poplar Creek. These are interim rods. They're not final rods. They're interim rods that addressed immediate things that we had to look at and resolve. Once we had those in place, the next effort was to address ETTP. The first thing we needed to do was we needed to get all the buildings down. So an action memo was signed, and we addressed the demolition of the K-25 building and the other 4 gaseous diffusion buildings. And then once those were done, we finished addressing all of the above ground structures on the site. Once that was done, back in 2020, we began addressing the actual soil contamination, which in many cases was located beneath those buildings. We are on schedule to complete all the soil remediation by 2024. Now that we've gotten a lot of that soil remediation addressed, the last step is to address the groundwater. Just so you know, there would not be it wouldn't be real logical to go out and try to address groundwater contamination if we had not already dug up all the source material. It would just continue to contaminate groundwater. So that was the sequence that got us to where we are today. So at ETTP, what we did is all the buildings in green there are the ones that have been demolished. That was all, like as I mentioned, that was all done in 2020. And then by 2024, we should have we're on schedule to have all of the soil contamination at ETTP that's above the groundwater table addressed. So what we did is, instead of trying to address this all as one big, huge project, we've broken ETTP up into different areas. The one we're going to talk about tonight is the green area that's inside the dash line. That's what we call the main plant area. It's the historical part of the plant where they built the original K-25 building, and most of the support facilities were located. The area next to it, the little blue one, that's what we call the K-31-33 area. That had 2 of the big gaseous diffusion buildings and some of the support facilities there. We'll talk a little bit more about that because there's a lot going on there that we want to let you all know about. And then the last area is what we call Zone 1. It's the yellowish area that's sort of the outside, or what we call the outside of the donut. It has some groundwater issues. We are currently in the process of working with EPA and TDEC to develop a remedial investigation work plan. And that will line out how we go out and we investigate first to determine where we have issues, how big those issues are. Once we've done that, we'll do a feasibility study to select different remedies for different areas. And then we'll get to where we are here, which is we'll have a proposed plan, and then where we select specific remedies, and then we'll do a record of decision. So the scope of this proposed plan, like I said, we're in the main plant area. There are numerous areas where we have groundwater contamination. But what we decided to do is address the 6 largest areas. They're the ones where the little boxes are highlighted in yellow. They're the largest source areas. We used a lot of different chemicals over time. They were, for a variety of reasons, some of them migrated into the soil and then into the groundwater. But these areas that we're addressing with this interim rod are the ones where we have significant source areas. And our objective is to reduce that source area to make follow-on remedies more practical. So as we go through this process, when we get to the proposed plan phase, what we do is we list out several alternatives and we evaluate those. And here in a moment. I'll show you how we evaluate those. The alternatives that we chose to evaluate are listed here. The first one, alternative, what we call alternative 0, is called no action. Just so you know, that's required by the regulations to be evaluated. What would happen if you did nothing at all? And it never is the one selected, because the reason you're out there doing something is because you have identified a risk, and we can't allow the risk to continue. So that one's, we have to evaluate it, but it's never selected. Alternative number 1 is a method called in situ thermal treatment. These are, the contaminants are called volatile organic compounds. If you apply heat to them, they vaporize and can be, in some sense, very simply put, they can be boiled off. We looked at that option, and for a variety of reasons, we decided that was not the one we wanted to use in this particular case. Alternative number 2 is the one that we did select. It's called enhanced in situ bioremediation. Don't worry about that. I'm going to explain that more here in a little bit. It's a lot of words to actually a fairly simple theory. The last alternative is called alternative 3, and that was in situ soil mixing. And it's just that. We go in, we add additives to the soil, we mix them in place, and try to reduce the contaminant concentration that way. Again, for a variety of reasons, that wasn't selected. This is a little bit, I know this is very hard to read, but this is a little more detailed description. The main point I want to make here is this slide does talk about the cost of the different remedies. Obviously, the top one, alternative 0, the no action, it has no cost. You're not doing anything. There's no cost in implementing that. There are costs associated with not doing, taking care of the risk. There's long-term other costs associated with that. Alternative 1, which is the in situ thermal treatment, that costs roughly the entire capital cost, and the cost of implementing the action itself is about $130 million. Alternative number 2, which is the one we've chosen, in situ bioremediation, total cost about $32 million, about $100 million less. And then alternative 3, which is the soil mixing, its total cost was over $160 million. So to give you an idea of how those all stacked up. And the reason that I want to make that point is because when we evaluate alternatives, there are what's called CERCLA decision criteria. One of the ones that enters into that conversation is the cost. The first sort of set of criteria that we look at, though, are what we call the threshold criteria. These are ones that these two criteria are sort of a yes/no. It's either you are complying with this or you are not, and if you're not, then it's not you don't choose this as your remedy. The first one being overall protection of human health and the environment. That's the whole point of all of this, is to attain that. And through a set of parts of the remedy, we're going to be able to achieve that. The second one is compliance with what we call applicable or appropriate and relevant and appropriate requirements. If you've been around the CERCLA world for a while, those are called ARARs. It's just a fancy name for laws and regulations. We have to obey the laws and regulations. The next set is what we call balancing criteria. These are not yes and no answers. These are, well, this remedy meets all of these really well, but it doesn't meet these over here quite as well. And so then the next remedy, it balances out differently. And that's where a lot of the work comes in for TDEC, EPA, and DOE, that we sit and we evaluate these balancing criteria, and we have to determine, because different things are important to different people in different organizations. And through a fairly long series of conversations, we addressed all of these balancing criteria. And as you can see, there are things like, what is the long-term effectiveness? What is the short-term effectiveness? Some things may be very effective in the short term and then just quit working. Or they may not be that effective in the short term, but in the long term, you get down to, perfectly clean. How well do they reduce toxicity, mobility, things like that of the contaminants? That enters into the equation. Ability to implement. This is one that I think this is probably one that we discuss quite a bit, and it has to do with there are a lot of things that are, quote, theoretically available and that you could go out and do, but how hard is it really to do that? How much will it cost? As you saw, those different remedies, there was quite a range in the costs, so that's something that enters into that equation. The last set is what we call the modifying criteria. In the end, it has to be acceptable both to the state, because they are the representatives of the community, and then it has to be the community itself also has to have an opportunity to express their concerns and give their input. And that's one of the reasons we're here tonight, is so that folks from the community can do that. So our preferred alternative, the one that DOE has proposed for this, what we call an interim record of decision, and I want to make a point of that because I want people to understand this is not the end of addressing the groundwater in the main plant area. There are decisions that have to be made after this. Once we see how well this proposed remedy works, once it's implemented, we will have an opportunity to come back and readdress both these particular pollutants and the others that are in the main plant area. And we will have to have a whole nother set of conversations with TDEC, EPA, and the public about what we think is the most effective remedy to put in place then. But for right now, we've selected the 6 area, the groundwater plumes with the highest concentrations. We're going to implement an in-situ bioremediation, and I'll go into that in a little more detail. And one other extra thing that we're going to do is we're going to continue to implement what our DOE has in place as land use controls, which is a prohibition on using the groundwater. That's actually that's not just for this remedy. If you know what how DOE transfer property around Oak Ridge, when we transfer property, it always has that deed restriction on it that there's a groundwater prohibition on it, and it's not because of the CERCLA aspect. It's just that's what DOE does. But that will be part of this remedy for the interim rod. The preferred alternative meets the statutory requirements of CERCLA. These are things such as, like I just said, it is protective of human health and the environment, both through the implementation of the remedy and the implementation of our land use controls. The remedy is cost effective, as I showed you. It's of the 4 different alternatives that we had to consider. There's one that's less, which is no action, but that's not a viable remedy. Then the other 2 were much more expensive. The remedy satisfies the statutory preference for permanent solutions through treatment. That's typically active treatment is a preference if it can be implemented because you get to your final goals much quicker. The next one is the interim remedy. Under CERCLA, we're allowed to waive certain aspects of our regulations, one of which is a requirement under the Safe Drinking Water Act that we meet MCLs at the end of the remedy. As I mentioned earlier, this is an interim remedy. This is not the final solution, so we're waiving that so that we can demonstrate how this technology works. The final remedy we won't have that waiver, and we'll have to meet MCLs and MCLs are the level of contaminants that are allowed in drinking water, like what comes out of your tap. And then last, as part of this, the goal of this is for us to reduce the levels of contaminants in these source areas to below 1,000 parts per billion. And we'll go over that here now. A lot of these source areas, the levels of contamination are in the tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of parts per billion. So dropping it down to less than 1,000 is a significant reduction in the mass of the contamination in that area. One of the reasons we want to do this is because most of these contaminants are what we call CVOCs, chlorinated volatile organic compounds. They were used in fairly large quantities at ETTP in the historical era, and a lot of them, for a variety of reasons, escaped from the buildings and the processes and entered into the groundwater. By doing this, we hope to reduce those levels down to levels that are acceptable. So how does this work? So bioremediation, so you understand, this is a technology, we're not the first ones to use it. This is a technology that's been implemented in numerous places across the country. It sounds very complex, but it's really not. There are microorganisms bacteria that already are in the soil. What they do is, over time, they will actually eat these VOCs and break them down to a less toxic form or totally eliminate them. But what you run into, there aren't enough of these in the environment, in the natural environment, a lot of times to reduce this. So what you do is you feed them. We inject, what we will do is we'll inject what we call a carbon substrate. Very technical term. What it really means is something like vegetable oil, corn oil. We'll inject that down there. What that does is the bacteria eat that and multiply, and the more you have, the faster they can break down the CVOCs. Once they've done that, we will evaluate whether we need to inject more. All of that will be part of the remedial design that we still have to do once we have the record of decision signed. And we'll determine things like location of the injections, the number of injection wells, how many times we need to do it, how frequently we need to do it. All of those questions, which are very relevant, they all come in a later phase in the CERCLA process, all during the design of the actual remedy. To give you an idea of how this works, this is a graphic of one of the plumes. I'm not saying this is the actual design that will happen, but this will give you an idea of how it's implemented. We go into the main source area, and sites for injection wells will be selected. In this case, it's that grid of dots. Once those locations are selected, the depth to which those injection wells go will be determined. Some of them will go down to the top of what we call weathered bedrock, which is bedrock is somewhat fractured. Other of the wells will go down into that, and then yet others may go all the way down into the bedrock. Again, that is all part of the design process that will occur after we have a signed record of decision. Once those are put in, then we'll inject the corn oil or whatever the carbon substrate is determined to be will be injected down in there. And then we wait and see how the system reacts to that. How much of a reduction in the contaminant mass do we actually achieve? This is not necessarily a fast process, but it'll get us to where we need to be. So that's sort of the very high level overview. If you would like, you can use this QR code and it will take you to where you can download the actual proposed plan, which goes into much more detail than I went into tonight. It talks much more about how the bioremediation actually works, things like that. It talks much more in depth about the other remedies that were evaluated and how they fell out of the process. If you wish to make any comments, you can either make the comments tonight or you can send comments to, if you prefer, you can send hard copy through the mail to the address shown here, or you can submit them through email at the email address at the bottom. And the public comment period continues through May 19th. We will accept comments up until the end of that day. As I mentioned earlier, the site's been broken into 3 different areas, and I just want to touch on this because not only is this decision a big deal, but we've also gotten approval of a proposed plan, same thing sort of like we're doing right now, for the K3133 area, and that public comment period actually starts tomorrow. And we will have another meeting like this to go over that selected remedy in 2 weeks from tonight. Same room, so if your calendar is open, we would appreciate anybody coming by and listening to us talk about that remedy. That remedy will be a little bit different from this one, but we welcome all public comment. And like I said, the main plant area, even after we have achieved a record of this interim record of decision, there will be decisions that have to follow on after that. And with that, that is our presentation for tonight. I will leave this up, so afterwards, if anybody would like to, they can come up with their phone and take a picture of the QR code. And I will turn it back over to Paula. Thank you.
So we'll talk about the process. And I do want to mention that the input from the public is preferred alternative presented in the proposed plan and will be video recorded from the presentation that was just conducted. So those wishing to provide input or make a comment during this public comment segment are asked to indicate that on a sign-up sheet when entering the OD. I mentioned that earlier. You'll be called on in the order in which you sign up, and you'll have 3 minutes to speak. If you're not finished with your segment, you can complete it after everyone has the opportunity to speak, and we will stay to hear your comment as long as needed. Please speak into the microphone and ensure your comment is captured in the video recording. And make sure you state and spell your name for the record. If you don't want to provide comments verbally, please feel free to provide them in the comment cards available in the back of the room. You can also provide comments through May 19th by emailing or mailing a letter to the contacts on the screen. Video recording of tonight's presentation will be posted online if you want to view it again or prior to making comments. Right order. I'm going to apologize ahead of time if I don't speak your name correctly. Please correct me when you get to the microphone. Bob Galinas.
I have no questions or comments.
Marcus Wilkins.
No comment, thank you.
Thank you, Marcus. Eileen Marcillo. Sid Garland.
No comment.
Doug Kolklischer. Hi.
Doug Colclasure, 103 Monticello Road, Oak Ridge. There's some heavy equipment out at the powerhouse area. It appears to be groundwater drilling equipment. I wonder if you address what the purpose is and what the intent, and what data will be represented by that work.
Thank you, Doug. Kevin Ironside.
No comment.
Alan Motley.
No comment.
Jared Brabazon.
No comment.
Christine Puckeh, or is it Duckeh?
Christine Puckett.
Puckett. Thank you. My apologies. Latanya Spencer Harvey.
No comment.
Stephen Luckman.
No comment.
Michael Walker.
No comment.
Carl Frody.
No comment.
Joanna Harden.
No comment.
Samantha Pack.
I think it's great that EPA, TDEC, and DOE came together to make this decision. I congratulate them.
Thank you, Samantha. Heather Lutz.
No comment.
Bree Humphrey.
No comment.
Paul Favara.
No comment.
Emily Sukanik.
No comment.
Sam Schaeffler.
No comment.
Randy Young.
No comment.
Joel Hewitt.
I will have a comment. I didn't sign up for the comment list, so I can go after anyone else can.
Emily Day.
No comment.
Holly Brabazon.
No comment.
Ellen Smith.
Just a quick comment. I'm supportive of the technical analysis and recommended conclusions in the proposed plan, but I was disappointed by the manner of presentation of the proposed plan. Felt like the document had an excessive number of acronyms or initialisms that were used oftentimes as the only reference to something like the 4 different alternatives were typically referred to by their 4-letter abbreviations, which are very difficult for people to understand. You know, I understand the nouns behind them, but the sequence of 4 letters is very confusing. I thought that there were far more abbreviations than necessary. I was also distressed to see at least one pretty clear error in the document. There's a reference to Alexander 2003. Alexander et al. 2003 document, and in fact, it's Alexander et al. 2013. So I looked and wondered, why are we looking at something 20 years old? It's only 10 years old, but I'd like to see better attention to making a document understandable to the public. I read a lot of these things, and so I don't feel that I was affected, but I think that the public in general needs a better presentation. So, thank you.
Thank you. Virginia Dale.
I just have a brief comment. I wanted to thank DOE and others for having this meeting and allowing the public to comment. I will hope to look at it in more detail later, and I wanted to thank the organizers for providing a Spanish translation. Thank you.
Thank you. Joel Hewitt.
Thank you. I apologize for asking to skip. I didn't quite realize we were just reading names rather than people who had signed up to comment. My name is Joel Hewitt. I'm the chair of the City of Oak Ridge Environmental Quality Advisory Board, or EQUAB. I have a question, comment, and then a question, but then first just a question for the room. If I could get a show of hands, who's just a pure local, unaffiliated with the project in any way? Okay, that's not a problem, it's not a critique. Walking in here tonight, overheard someone say, there's gonna be almost no locals here. I'm not gonna name names, it's not a problem. Because I've signed up for as many distribution lists and newsletters as I can, as chair of this board, I got a TDEC notification, I think 6 days ago, and forwarded that on to the board. Only saw notification for, notification, but within the news, an ad for this meeting 2 days ago, I think in Oak Ridge today. So one question is, and I think this is one we can answer today, when was this meeting first publicly announced? If anyone knows. And again, I'm not here to critique, I'm just curious.
The public comment period was announced April 5th, and
Yes.
that's when the meeting was announced.
Okay.
It was announced in 4 different local papers. It was announced through social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, both for DOE and UCOR's social media networks. So, and then we also did send out notifications to each of the local governments.
Okay, I don't doubt that's true, which is why it was an honest question. I've worked for DOE in the past. I'm a fan. Worked for them locally, worked for them nationally in DC. Try and follow as much as I can. Want to make sure I'm on the proper mailing list. Maybe we can discuss later on to make sure that I am, because there's a bunch, and I get a lot of the other news as well. One question for the substance. I wouldn't mind if we go back one slide to the wellbore depth chart.
You're chancing it with me right now.
There
There we go. Also, again, reviewed as much as I could so far. As I understand it, in some informal discussions with board members, understand this to be one of the best, generally accepted ways to do groundwater remediation. One question I had, having a bit of background in the oil and gas industry, part of which comes from some DOE time. You know, and I think alternative one mentioned what is sometimes called thermal flood. I wonder if the question is there a feasibility, or what was the reasoning behind there not being a hybrid alternative that used bioremediation as the central core target of achieving this, but then also potentially using wellbore water flood on the outer extremes of the plume, potentially thermal flood as well. And again, this is an honest question. I know that can do a lot of good things when you know the extent of an oil and gas reservoir. It may be applicable to something like this, it may not, but given that they're both presented, I'd like to know. Thank you.
Thank you. Is anyone would like to make any further comments at this time? So I'm gonna thank you right now for showing up, and we will be here until 8. And if anybody does have any comments until that time, we'll be here. Thank you.